and welcome to another edition of the ArtCast. I'm your host, Art Shimko, coming to you from beautiful Austin, Texas. This is episode 9 for May 18th, 2020. It was 3 years ago today that we lost singer Chris Cornell, famed Seattle vocalist from the band Soundgarden, and spearheaded the Temple of the Dog project, a tribute to his roommate, friend, and vocalist of Mother Love Bone, Andrew Wood. The project also featured Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament and Eddie Vedder, who all went on to form Pearl Jam. And it was Chris Cornell and Soundgarden drummer Matt Cameron on that project. Also later on, Cornell went on to form the band Audioslave with the members of Rage Against the Machine, sans Zach De La Rocha. He had a lot of success with that band as well. They put out at least a couple albums, maybe a few, I'm not sure. I didn't follow that project, but I know they were very successful. I had a lot of friends who liked them. But yeah, he died on this day in 2017. He was found unconscious in his MGM Grand hotel room in Detroit by his bodyguard. Soundgarden just concluded a show at the Fox Theater the previous evening on May 17th. And his death was ruled suicide by hanging. So that was very sad and tragic loss there. It was one of the great voices, not just of the Seattle music and rock scene, but just in general. I thought when I first heard Cornell's voice, I thought it was very amazing. I thought, wow, this generation, we found our Robert Plant. I thought he was, I thought his voice with their music, it was just perfect. And I was very fortunate to see them in concert in 2014. I had missed them many times when they'd come to Philadelphia. And finally, in 2014, they were on a reunion tour, co-headlined with 9 Inch Nails, whom I'd seen before with David Bowie back in 1995. So it was cool to see 9 Inch Nails again. But seeing Soundgarden, that was the real treat for me. And yeah, it was awesome to finally check that one off my list. And, who knew less than 3 years later after I saw that concert that Chris Cornell would be dead at the age of 52. So there's that on this day in history. And before I move on to the main subject of the show, got a couple other notes here. Sad news here. Former WWE wrestler Shad Gaspard, he went out for a swim with his family, with his wife and his 10-year-old son, and they were amongst a group of swimmers that were caught in a really strong riptide, a real strong current. Around so it's on Sunday afternoon in Venice Beach, and lifeguards were out there. They were pulling all the swimmers out, and Gaspard made sure that his son was rescued. He put him in the presence of the lifeguards and such, but then it's been reported that he was swept under from the current. An official from the Los Angeles Fire Department said that the 39-year-old did not, quote, he quote, did submerge, Divers were out there on Sunday. Then they were out there today on Monday, all day looking. And as far as about 4 hours ago right now, it is, what time is it here? It is 8:52 p.m. Central Daylight Time. So the search was called off, I'd say about, at this point, it was probably like 4 hours ago. So yeah, really, really sad news there, really tragic. The search has been called off, and now any kind of hope is very, minor for his survival. Really sad to see that. Heard a lot of great things about Shad. As I'm online, as I followed this story earlier in the day, saw a lot of people making comments about whether they had a great experience with him or they've heard how great he was behind the scenes. He was tag team champions with his partner JTG. They had the tag team Crime Time. They were a big part of the Ruthless Aggression era, the early to mid 2000s in WWE. They had a lot of skits. They were they were featured in a lot of a lot of segments on TV. They had a lot of in some main programs and stuff. So very sad to hear. As I said, the last update was that the Coast Guard had called off the search Monday afternoon, 4 p.m. Pacific time. So we'll see what happens, or give my best to his wife and his son and to his friends, his colleagues, former colleagues and such. It's really sad to see. That was first reported on TMZ this morning. And before we go, so one more thing here that had caught my eye, that's really sad. The wife of Iron Maiden singer Bruce Dickinson passed away today in a quote tragic. It was a quote terrible tragedy. She was 61 years old. Her name's Patty Bowden. The statement that Bruce had released said, quote, "This is a terrible tragedy which appears to be a tragic accident. Our children Austin, Griffin, and Kia and I are devastated. Out of respect for Patty, we won't be making any further comment at this hugely difficult and painful time for our family." All I would say at the end here, this was in the Daily Express in the UK, where that broke the story earlier today. So emergency services were called to their marital home in London earlier today. So that's all the details that are given for that story. Again, our best goes out to Bruce Dickinson and his children. That's a really horrible tragedy there as well. Our best to both families there and such. And so, going to move on to today's topic. And it's one that I've seen on Facebook plenty of times, and I've actually been nominated for it twice by both my friends Michelle and David. It's that 10 albums that have influenced you, influenced your musical taste and such. I've seen some people do 20, but the common one is 10, and it's like each day you just post an album cover and no explanation, although some people have offered explanations, and it's, I guess if you don't offer any explanation, it's to start up a conversation with in the comment section with friends or whomever to talk about the album that you posted and such. I'd seen both the nominations. I was tagged in online, and I decided I was going to make this a podcast topic because I post a lot about music on my Facebook anyway, and I thought I'd be spamming even more, putting my album covers, and each day it's just going to get maybe a few likes, maybe we get a comment or so. So I thought I'll just make a list of my top 10 influential albums that have spawned between when I started really started getting into listening to music seriously in like late middle school up until now. This list probably ends like around maybe my mid to late 20s. I mean, there's plenty of albums since then that I felt have influenced me in ways and such, and led me to other genres and other types of music that I may have not listened to before or not have given much time or a chance because I was stuck in one other music movement and scene and whatever. So I wrote this list down, and I had to remember. I remembered at least 5 or 6 of the albums that I always mention in my top 10, but I kept thinking, well, I don't know how often my top 10 changes, but I may have done like top 10 favorite albums, not necessarily maybe influential albums for my listening and tastes developing. So, but now at least I have it on record. So if I have to think about like, what were my top 10 influential albums? It's like I can go back to this episode now. But as I said, I remembered a good portion of them, and some I just had to dig further into my brain and really remember what I was listening to back in high school or like art school and afterward. That really made an effect on me to listen to other types of music in those areas and such. So these are not in any particular order. It's just 10 albums. I'll just name them and I'll just give a little explanation of each one briefly. But the first one I put down was Led Zeppelin, the first album with the Hindenburg explosion on it. And I had heard about Led Zeppelin prior to a little bit. I think I probably knew Fool in the Rain on the radio when I was a kid, but my dad didn't listen to them a lot. If he did, he didn't really mention them to me. I think he was listening to more bands like Chicago and Boston and Bruce Springsteen. Those were like his big favorites at the time. So I'd say I was 13, and a friend of mine, Evan, he made me a mixtape, and it was a 90-minute blank tape, and he really was copying an Anthrax album for me. It was Among the Living, and it took up one side, so there was space on the other side, so he just threw Zeppelin 1 on the side B. So as soon as I was done listening to Among the Living, I flipped it over and I was like, oh, Led Zeppelin. Like, I've heard of these guys. Let me check it out. And the way it was sequenced on this copy that he gave me, it opened up with Your Time Is Gonna Come. So that's always really been one of my favorite Zeppelin songs. And, this is the album that started it all, for me. From there on out, I went out and got other Zeppelin albums and talked to my other friends about Zeppelin and which songs and which albums were the best and such. And I think I have to think what my favorite album is. Probably, I'd say Houses of the Holy, I think, is my favorite Zeppelin album. But as far as influential, the first one definitely for sure, because it opened my eyes, it cracked my egg open to Zeppelin and got me into them and a whole bunch of other bands through listening to that album, because it was different than the metal stuff that I was getting into. I was getting into very like fast, thrashy, heavy metal, and that was left field for me thinking, but for me listening. But it was made sense later on, and I loved the album right away anyway. So the second album, speaking of thrashy metal, Metallica, Master of Puppets. This is the first Metallica album I ever bought. Again, I'd say I was 13. I was 13 or 14. I think I was 13. I bought this cassette on the way to my friend's house. There was a record shop across from the house that me and my mom lived in. This place called Strawberries Records and Tapes, right off of Route 70. And I went in, just looking at the tapes, and I saw Metallica, Master of Puppets, and I pulled out the cassette and I looked at the cover and I saw the logo and I said, "Oh," I was like, I seen this logo on one of my friend's jackets. These guys seem, they got to be cool in a name. I've heard that these guys are really cool band, so let me check them out. So I paid like $8 or $9 for the tape. I put on my Walkman on my way to my friend's house, and I hear the acoustic intro, the Battery, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And as soon as it kicks in, I was like, oh my God. And when I first heard this album and when I heard Metallica, I thought, this is, to me, what I thought heavy metal was. I mean, I love Judas Priest and Iron Maiden. Those are the first metal cassettes I had in my possession. But when I heard Metallica, I thought, man, I'm like, this is heavy metal. This, to me, is metal. It's like fast and thrashy and loud and angry-ass vocals. And the lyrics were cool. They were very contemporary lyrics. They weren't stupid. They were like, you read through them and you recite them, and it just, oh, what a great, I mean, it's still my favorite album to this day. When people ask, like, when they're like, Lightning or Puppets? For me, I'm like, Puppets. I know Lightning is a tremendous album. I love Lightning. For me, I think I would, for those first albums, I'd go, I would go Puppets, Justice, Lightning, and Kill 'Em All. That's how I would go for those first 4 Metallica albums. So, next album, Miles Davis, Bitches Brew. Man, this was a real eye opener. This was a real educational tool for me. I was working shipping and receiving in Barnes and Noble in the mid to late 90s. And we had a boombox in the back and everybody brought in their tapes and their CDs, and we'd keep our stuff back there sometimes because it's nobody, we could trust it back there, and it was going to take anything. And plus, like, we had like a coded lock anyway on our doors. But I came in for a Saturday shift. It was like Saturday morning shift into early afternoon. So I'm looking at what to listen to, and I saw one of my coworkers, actually my supervisor, he left behind his copy of Bitches Brew. And I think it was a cassette. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, yeah, I've seen this cover before. I was like, this looks cool. I was like, I know it's like jazz or whatever. I'm like, I'll check it out. I'm like, if I don't like it, I'll just take it out and put something else on. And I put that album on, and I was like, oh my God, like, it sounded so awesome. It wasn't like anything I had heard before. Like, I'd already been like listening to the Dead at that point, and whatever. Just, I was like, my brain was, no one was like, it kind of going in that direction already. But when I heard Bitches Brew, I was like, oh my God, like, that was a fucking major music revelation for me. I instantly fell in love with Miles Davis, and I instantly fell in love with Fusion and that time period he was playing, that late 60s, early 70s, before he went into his hiatus in the 70s and came back out in the early 80s and stuff. That period, with this album and a little after, like, it was just, I mean, I still listen to this album and I still find like new things in it that I may not have caught before, or it still sounds fresh to me, like so many, over like 25 years after I listened to it. It's an amazing record, and it led me to, listen to other Miles Davis, and then I got into John Coltrane from there, and I got into Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I got into Return to Forever, and and Weather Report, and Herbie Hancock, and like all these. I just, it brought me my love of jazz, from that record. It wasn't a traditional record, I'd heard whatever. I'd heard like, soft jazz or new age jazz, whatever, and I'd heard some classical jazz, but Bitches Brew put me into listening to that type of music, and like maybe like more like avant-garde music and stuff. Like, I was, like I said, I was already listening to the Dead, and I'd heard, I had heard a bit of Sonic Youth. I was dabbling into that, and then anything, I was like open to like listening to things that were different in a way like that. And when I heard Bitches Brew, I was like, oh man, like amazing album. Fourth album on my list is Grateful Dead, Live Dead. I mean, there's a lot of Dead records I could have put on here. I could have, put American Beauty. I could have put Terrapin Station. But Live Dead is that's the album where I was like, this is the Grateful Dead. Like, I get it now. I understand. Like, here, you know, that 26, 27 minute opening Dark Star. I mean, that's probably the best recorded Dark Star, you know, that's out there. You know, it's an amazing piece. It's an amazing performance. And then going right into St. Stephen and the entire show. I mean, I think it's comprised of a couple shows. I used to have the original show that had the Dark Star and the St. Stephen, and I think wasn't too far off from the Live Dead listing, but track listing, but it maybe just a song or two different. But that's a great, you know, that's an album where I'd say I would like introduce that to someone. It's just one record, you know, it's about 7 songs or whatever, and you know, it's the staple of their set lists at that time period. And it's it's a tremendous album. I mean, that's a record I would give to somebody, say this is the Dead. If someone were to ask, like, I would just give it to somebody because not a lot of people are going to appreciate it. But anybody who wants to understand what the Dead is, I'm saying, here's Live Dead. You know, take some time to absorb it. You know, maybe have some assistance. So the 5th album on here is OK Computer by Radiohead, and this is an album I listen to a lot when I am, speaking of assistance, whenever I'm tripping of any sort, whether it's on LSD or mushrooms or something like that. You know, I'll always put this record on. This record has a special place in my heart, even sober. You know, it's a great record. It's just it's a masterpiece. It's, you know, it's a, you know, I remember the Creep song when I was in art school. I had friends that like really got into it. My friend Fran like loved him from there. You know, I was like, that's a good song. And then I heard the Bends and I was like, wow, that's a pretty, you know, that's quite a leap up from what I had originally heard. And then OK Computer just went into a whole other dimension of atmospheres and composition and sounds and just in a way of, and producing the record and the song structure, you know, I mean, right before they really dove in with like Kid A and albums after that. But it's a beautiful record. You know, it's one that I still, like I said, play, you know, whether I'm sober or not. I mean, it's definitely a masterpiece. And you know, I think people who thought of Radiohead as that band that does Creep, like they heard this album and just, you know, they many people fall in love with them and take them seriously. And if they hadn't already with the Bends, like I said, the Bends was a great record, but that was leading up to OK Computer, which is definitely one of the greats still after so many years. My next record, so this will be number 6. This is Exit Stage Left by Rush. And I love Rush. You know, I hold them near and dear to my heart. You know, they're the biggest cult band of all time. A band that you would talk about and people would be like, yeah, those guys are good. Or, oh, yeah, Tom Sawyer. Or, yeah, those guys are all right. Or, you know, the guy's voice is annoying. You know, that's the comments you would get from casual fans, but they've gotten their recognition and their just due, you know, after years of, you know, being that band that had, you know, no radio hit. You know, they have videos, but, you know, maybe not in high rotation as much as like your regular pop bands and such. But, you know, you go to the arena and they pack the arena. You know, they have to add 2 nights to a city when they're on tour because that first night sells out right away. You know, one of the things I always admired about that band is, you know, they just maintain that kind of popularity. But I mean, the quality of music, it's no surprise that Rush has the following that they do. And Exit Stage Left is it's an awesome album. Again, there's so many other records I could have put on here. I could have put 2112. I could have put Farewell to Kings. I could have put even, you know, maybe even something like Presto or something. But But Exit Stage Left is one of the earliest albums I had heard from Rush that I really, really love. It's a tremendous collection of their music from, Hemispheres, A Farewell to Kings, Permanent Waves, Moving Pictures. The album probably came out in like '82, but it's an awesome live album. It's the VHS version of it is tremendous too. The live Xanadu, live 2112, the people singing along to Closer to the Heart. It's an amazing record. It's a record that I listen to a lot these days, and it really made me build my love and appreciation for Rush when I was in high school, and I got all their albums, and I read up on them whenever I could, before the internet, like if you found a book or something, a passage of him in somewhere to read about, that was always cool, or, in magazines and such, any kind of interview, it was always cool to see something about them. So let's see, we'll move on here. Got a few more records here left. Number 7, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy. And this is the first rap group that I really loved and fell in love with. So a record came out in 1988. I probably bought it like the year after. I first heard about Public Enemy because the guys in Anthrax wore their T-shirts in their videos and in concerts. Like you would see them, like they had that, the Crossfire Target logo with the figure in the cross hair, whatever, the crossfire of the target, and I saw that, and they mentioned him in articles, and then on MTV, I saw this appearance. It was on some talk show, and I thought it was Jon Stewart. I can't find the clip. I wish I could, but Public Enemy did this version of Night of the Living Bassheads, and it was a fucking awesome version. I remember being like, these guys are fucking killer. And then I saw their interview afterwards, and I thought, wow, these guys are really cool. I never bought a rap record before. I remember thinking, like, I borrowed Raising Hell and I think LL Cool J Radio from a friend of mine in middle school, but I had not, or no, maybe that was high school by then? It was probably high school. And but I never bought a rap record. I remember, like, it was a separate section. I think it was like rap or R&B, probably. I think it had its own section in the record store. So I remember going to that section, and I saw the tape, and I was like, this is interesting. And it's got like a million titles on it because they have skits in between, and they have like little interludes and stuff. It was different than any like kind of record I'd heard before. I'm used to like a rock record or whatever, pop record is just straight songs through, and that's it, like 10 songs, and that's it, you're done. So I remember listening to this album, and I was like, wow, like, these guys are awesome. They're angry as hell, man. It's like, this is like their heavy metal. This is like their punk. Like, they sounded heavier to me than some heavy metal records, the Bomb Squad. It's such an awesome production team. They had these heavy beats. They used like a fast rhythm, so many beats per minute. The record was awesome. Again, it's a record I listen to this day, and from there I got to get into guys like Tribe Called Quest and Gangstar and and all these other rap groups that came about in the 90s and stuff, De La Soul. Just all cool stuff, man. And thanks to Public Enemy. So, record number 8 is Smashing Pumpkins' Gish, their first album. I heard this my senior year of high school. I was setting up some artwork for our senior classes. We're doing in a college prep class. We were doing gallery showing for like a final for like our before we graduated. So we were doing like an art show with all like our best work. And while we were setting up, my friend Chris had this cassette by the Smashing Pumpkins called Gish, and he was playing it. And I was like, who are these guys? They're Smashing Pumpkins. Yeah, these guys are cool. And I was like, I just kept hearing the album. I heard the whole album throughout the time we're putting up artwork and setting up this gallery space, whatever, show space. And I was like, man, this is a great album. So I either copied it or I bought it. But I remember graduating that year from high school, that summer of '92. Like, I played that album like every day, especially like when I went on road trips with my parents. We go on like these weekend, day trips or whatever, like on a Saturday or Sunday or whatever. And I would have this cassette on my Walkman, and I would just like look out the window at the scenery and just play this album like all the time. Like, I just loved it. I just loved how, the songs were and how the guitar sounded, and, Billy's voice was interesting and the lyrics were cool. It was just I love Melancholy and Infinite Sadness. That and like Siamese Dream. Those first three albums are like his best work. But Gish, again, that started it all, and I thought it was cool what he was doing, because it was also the age of Nirvana and the grunge stuff, and, I had Pearl Jam and all these bands, and Stone Temple Pilots had like a classic rock sound, and so did Soundgarden. But, Smashing Pumpkins, they were like a really like progressive sounding group at that time, and they were acknowledging like their metal roots, which I thought was really cool. So got a couple more albums here before we wrap up today's episode. Ozric Tentacles, Strangitude. Yeah, I discovered these guys in the mid-90s. I was at a party and I found this, I saw this tape and I played it. I was like, it looked like a hand-drawn cover. And I was like, what is this? I'm like, maybe it's some like hippie stuff or something or whatever. I thought the name was interesting, Ozric Tentacles. And I played it in my, I think I played it somewhere, I don't know, my car stereo, whatever. And I was like, wow, I'm like, this is really, really, really cool. This is very unique. It was like the best blend of electronic and rock. Ozric Tentacles, if you're not familiar with them, they're from England. They're a 5-piece instrumental, like space, progressive. They really have their own sound. They've been around since the early 80s. They used to set up. They would bring their instruments and a generator and strobe lights and shit to some field somewhere in England, and they'd set up, and all these hippies would show up, and it would be like a rave kind of deal, and they'd be up all night dancing and doing drugs and tripping and whatever, and dancing to these like bright lights and strobe lights. These guys play these tremendous instrumentals, just mind bending. Definitely appropriate for for doing your tripping and all that kind of fun stuff. But yeah, those guys, like my friends and I had a few friends who got it. Me and a few friends, we got into them heavily, and we would follow them, whenever they came to town. They didn't come to town a lot, but when they did, we would make sure that we would see them, because they showed up in the States like maybe every like 4 years or so. There was a couple years where they came like a bit frequent, more frequent than before, but before that it had been like every 4 years or 5 years that they would come into the States. So whenever they came, we were like, oh, we gotta go, and we turned on as many people as we could on to them, because those guys are such a great band. We met them, me and a couple friends, we met them in Philly. I think it was in '99. Their tour bus was like parked not too far from the venue where we saw them. So we caught up with the lead guy, the lead guitarist Ed, and I think we talked to John, who was like the vocalist, flutist guy, kind of, and frontman kind of dude, and I think did we talk to the keyboardist Seaweed? Yeah, interesting fellows. Really, really nice guy. They signed our ticket stubs. We were being a bit geeky, but I mean, like I said, these guys, we didn't know when they were going to come around. I think they came actually around the following year in 2000, and we saw them again at another venue in Philly, and then they came back like 4 years after that. So, but they're always fun to listen to when when your mind is altered, and even when they're sober, they've really again, they opened me up to listen to all sorts of other type of similar music, and I was already into progressive rock, so they opened me up to a few more bands in their kind of genre stuff, spacey electronic rock. So, and my final album that I have on my list, album 10, which is also within the prog realm, is Genesis, Selling England by the Pound. This album is from 1973. It's from the Peter Gabriel theatrical era, when their songs were a little longer and more story based and conceptual based, and they had a particular type of stage show with like a stage set and lights, and Peter Gabriel had his costumes, and this album, this is like their quintessential album, I think. I mean, I from that era, I would maybe say my favorite album is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which is the album that follows Selling England by the Pound, and that's the last album that Peter Gabriel would be on. That's a really complex, kind of weird album. It's a lot to take in. It's a double album, and I would say maybe it's an acquired taste, but the music is really tremendous on there, and it's always fun to still figure out the story because no one knows what that story is about. But it's a really cool album. But Selling England by the Pound, that's classic Genesis right there. That's where I felt they really all got it together. I mean, Nursery Crime, Foxtrot, those are great albums. You have Musical Box, you have Get 'Em Out by Friday, you have Supper's Ready, you have Watcher of the Skies. You have so many great songs on those other albums. But Selling England by the Pound, I mean, that opening with Dance of the Moonlit Night, and then Cinema Show, and Firth of Fifth, and I Know What I Like, which became their big hit back then. There's all sorts of like cool stuff on there, and I saw this tribute band, which is they're actually endorsed by Genesis. They do it to the T. They're called the Musical Box. They're out of, I think they're from Montreal, and they tour the States from time to time, and they recreate the stage show of Genesis from that era. And the first time I saw them was when they were doing the Selling England by the Pound tour. So that album has special meaning to me. Really opened me up to that era of Genesis, and it's just a type of music that I would play. I have very sentimental feelings towards that music in that time period when I was getting into that era of Genesis. And then I was already like into Genesis, but I thought they were kind of hokey at times, but then I had a newfound respect for them once I heard that era of Genesis and read the history, and then like re-listened to the later era, the 80s Phil Collins period. I love all of Genesis. I think all of their entire body of work is great, but this album really opened me up to the Peter Gabriel era, and it's their best work as far as a cohesive unit. By the time they got to The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Peter was there was distance between him and the band for several reasons, and that album was not worked upon as collaborative between him and the band. It was like the band really worked on the music on their own, and Peter was working on the lyrics because he had a conceptual story which I don't think he finished, or there's all sorts of different stories about how that those lyrics were written, or how that story was written, or how it wasn't finished, or how nobody knows what it's about except for Peter. I don't even know if Peter knows what it's about, but still, that's a great record. But, if you want to hear, as I said, the quintessential Genesis record of the Peter Gabriel era, I would say, Selling England by the Pound is the way to go. So that's going to do it. I hope you enjoyed listening to my list and analysis of the top 10 albums that influenced me and my musical tastes. And as I said, if I could do a top 20, there would be, 10 more that were just as important, that have shaped my tastes to what they are. But and it wouldn't just be albums where I'm like, I like this album, because I have differences between that and an album that's really shaped, my influences and led me to, to listen to other things, to open and expand my tastes even further in music, because there's always more out there to listen to, So that's gonna do it. Thank you again for listening. Hope you enjoy all these episodes. Got to figure out what I'm going to do for episode 10. I know it's a mini milestone. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. It might just be a regular episode. Who knows? But we shall see how things go. So, all right, folks. You have a great week. And as I said, thanks for listening to the ArtCast. It's been episode 9 for May 18th, 2020. You all be safe out there, and I will talk to you soon.